Brandon Sanderson out with another secret project number 2. This one's called The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. And at first, I didn't really care for the premise too much because to me, it just felt too much like Total Recall. But after reading a few chapters, I realized that that was not the case. There is for sure enough different in this book that it was not like Total Recall at all. And I overall really enjoyed it. Brandon Sanderson's first secret project book that came out, Tress of the Emerald Sea, was set in his Cosmere universe, which is where he does a lot of his books. And there was a lot of Cosmere specific things that happened, a lot of lore that you had to know the background of or had to have read other books to understand. And in this one, this was just a one-off. This is completely separate world from the Cosmere, and you didn't have to have any prior knowledge whatsoever to be able to read it and understand everything about it. So I think that is really nice because from what I've seen, Brandon Sanderson is mostly putting out Cosmere books. And so unless you go back and read some of his earlier work, you're not really in any way introduced to his new writings. This book is much more approachable for the new reader. So this is, if you haven't read Brandon Sanderson before and you are interested in reading some of his stuff, this would be a great place to start to see kind of like how he writes stories and humor and just his style overall. Now, this one is kind of unique in that it's a first-person story. Most of his books are heavier on the fantasy side. This one is more science fiction, but it does take place in like a medieval time, so it's like certain characters are sci-fi, but the setting is fantasy, and it's just really fun. I enjoyed that about it. Now, the story overall, I'm not going to get into any spoilers. The story overall I thought it was really great, fun, and straightforward. I've had some issues with some recent books that I've read of his where there's just like it feels like these unnecessary twists for the sake of having a twist, and this one didn't have anything like it. And maybe this would be a negative for some people, but you could probably predict what will happen at the end of the book after only a few chapters in, and you would probably be correct. But for me personally, that was kind of a positive. It's like, oh, he wasn't doing these crazy things to try to just trick you, or to make these twists happen to like, oh wow, look at what I did. You would have never expected that. It was just like, hey, this is a really fun story with a fun character who goes through this journey of self-development and tries to figure his life out, literally tries to figure out who he is. And it was a great story. Now, like I said, overall, this is a great book, and I'll say it right now, I would recommend reading this one because it is a fun book. But to talk about a few of the things that I disliked, because there were a couple. First and foremost, and the biggest thing. Now, I read audiobooks. I listen strictly to audiobooks as a time saver. I do not have time to be able to sit down and read a physical book most of the time. The way this audiobook reads to you, there are page inserts. This is not a spoiler, but to kind of give an idea of what I'm talking about. This book reads, right, The Frugal Wizard's Handbook for Surviving Medieval England. This handbook is an actual thing in this story. So there are page inserts from this referenced handbook that read like an encyclopedia. And if I'm physically reading, maybe I can just skip them, but how the audiobook reads it to you, it goes maybe 1 to 2, maybe 3 chapters in a row of story, and then it gives you a page insert. And those page inserts can actually be quite long. And after a while, I found them to be extremely boring and to pull me out of the story. But the way the audiobook reads, I'm not sure if it is necessary to read them. It turns out, after reading it, it is not necessary to listen to it, in my opinion. It does give you some cool world building, some cool lore behind like what's going on, why he's here, how he got there into this medieval England. But realistically, you do not need to read, or in my case, audiobook, listen to those page inserts whatsoever. I didn't know that at the time, and I was becoming bored whenever those page inserts came up, and it's just like an encyclopedia reading of information. Some of them were pretty silly, some of them were funny. It gave some levity and some humor to the story, which was fine. I think it happened too often though, and I did not enjoy the inserts after a while. Now, the other thing, I wouldn't even call this a dislike, just something that I kind of noted. This book, while it was not in the Cosmere, a lot of this stuff felt really similar to how the Cosmere works. I don't want to give any specifics for what felt very Cosmere to me, because I feel like it would give away a little too much of the story, or some of the aspects of the story that I think are fun and enjoyable and that people would want to read about. But I will say, this felt very Cosmere adjacent. And while that isn't necessarily a bad thing whatsoever, this book felt very Cosmere adjacent. While it has no impact on those books, I would totally expect some of these things to be like, oh yeah, that's exactly how it would be in the Cosmere, and I could totally see a world that does this or this or this. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was really fun. Once I got past that initial like gut feeling of, oh, this is just Total Recall, which was not the case, I enjoyed it. It was a fun one. I would recommend reading it even if you've never heard of Brandon Sanderson before watching this, which would be kind of crazy. But if you're interested, read it. I bought the audiobook. Audiobook's $15. Pretty inexpensive as far as books are concerned, and even the digital copies are even cheaper than the audiobook. So it's very affordable pricing, and I would recommend that you read it if you're interested. That's about all I have. So with that, thanks for watching. Hey, Nick here. If you enjoyed this video, please gently caress that like button for us.
And Ray, thanks for watching. It was a blast. Make sure to hit that subscribe if you want to stay up to date with what we're doing, what me and him are doing. There. Me and him, Nick and Ray. Subscribe.